Hello, and welcome to our fifth class on the book of Revelation. Let's start with a quick review. Revelations chapters 12 to 22 traces the defeat of Satan. John describes a cosmic battle where ordinary limits of time and space don't apply. Satan appears to act through other representatives, and we encounter two very unusual beasts. Popular culture has the power to seduce Christians into compromising their convictions and relaxing into complacency. Revelation deals with the problems of the seven churches. They're facing persecution, pressures to assimilate into the surrounding culture, and a slide into complacency over their faith. Revelation functions to support the persecuted, strengthen the faith of those who are considering assimilation, and wake up those who are becoming complacent. Last time, we left John looking into the throne room, listening to a song of praise sung to God and the Lamb. In Revelation chapter 15, verse 1, the seven angels first appeared. Now, John begins to pay a little closer attention to them. The tabernacle of the covenant law corresponds to the pattern of the tabernacle Moses saw on Mount Sinai. The seven angels bringing the bowls of plagues are clothed in white linen, symbolizing their function as priests, and wore a gold sash, symbolizing royalty and the high priesthood. In Revelation chapter 5, the angels carried bowls that contained the incense of prayers going up to heaven. Now the action is reversed, and the bowls bear God's wrath that will be poured out on earth. Smoke fills the temple, a sign of the presence of God. The thick smoke ensures the angels won't return to the throne room until their task is completed. Now recall the sequence of the judgments in chapter 14. First, there was the general judgment in verse 6, then the judgment on Babylon in verse 8, and the third judgment on those who worship the beast in verse 9. Now, John will describe similar judgments in reverse order, starting with the worshipers of the beast. Let's pause a moment and discuss how the wrath of God functions in Revelation. First, God may choose not to intervene directly because human wickedness will collapse under its own weight. Think the fall of the USSR or the fall of apartheid in South Africa. These systems were so corrupt, they could not be sustained. But then there are times when God chooses to step in, often when the situation is out of control. This is what we see here with the seven bowls. God's wrath may seem excessively harsh, but unless evil is utterly destroyed, it will only pause for a time and then reappear. This is obvious whenever we look at history. Evil regimes rise and fall and rise again. Like the first four trumpets, the first four bowls bring plagues on the earth, sea, fresh waters, and the sun. Again, this repetitive nature demonstrates that Revelation isn't meant to predict a neat sequence of events we can track, but issues the same message of warning in multiple ways. Now, unlike the trumpet plagues that affected one-third of the earth, the plagues from the bowls are more complete judgments on the worshipers of the beast. Each series asks the same question. Given God's judgment, will people repent or not? The first bowl is poured on the earth and affects the people who have the mark of the beast. Instead of the mark allowing the worshipers to escape society's judgment, the mark becomes a festering sore, causing suffering. Like the plague of boils in the Exodus, this mark pushes people to repent of the practices that oppress others. The second bowl is poured on the sea, which turns to blood, and all the creatures die. Now, this doesn't explain why the innocent perish. The poor sea creatures never hurt anyone. Instead, it addresses a related question. Why do the innocent suffer and the guilty survive? Where is their justice? The third bowl is poured out, and all the fresh water and all the rivers turn to blood, rather than being limited to the Nile River as it was in Exodus. The voice from the altar suggests that finally the prayers of the saints are being answered. The fourth bowl is poured on the sun, which scorched the people with fire. Again, the wicked aren't destroyed, but given an opportunity to respond. And their response? They curse God instead of repent. Now, we all have a choice between praising and cursing God. The people choose to curse. The fifth bowl deals with the beast, which is Rome, and the imperial cult. Remember, the beast received the throne from Satan, the dragon, and so this bowl attacks the throne, thus attacks the imperial system. Instead of destroying the beast's kingdom, like we might expect, darkness falls, like the darkness in Egypt during the 10 plagues. Still, the people refuse to change because they are allies of the beast. The sixth bowl, like the sixth trumpet, is poured on the Euphrates River. Remember, the Euphrates is a natural barrier against threats arising from the east. The Romans were worried about the Parthians invading from that direction. Instead of surrendering, the beast and dragon intensify their opposition and release foul spirits like frogs, another echo of the 10 plagues. Now, frogs are considered unclean and should not be in your mouth. I mean, yuck. It is more than obvious the beast and dragon are unclean. These unclean spirits draw other nations into a foolish battle. When the drum beats of war sound, the situation becomes more and more dangerous. The term Armageddon has become synonymous with nuclear war, but let's look at where the term actually originates. Megiddo is a plain in northern Israel, and the mountain of Megiddo, which in Hebrew is Har Megiddo, is a city on the plain where the enemies of Israel were defeated. Deborah was victorious here, King Josiah was killed here, and in Zechariah chapter 12, Megiddo is the place where those who worship pagan gods will mourn. In the Old Testament, Megiddo is the place where God's enemies were destroyed. We should not take this place name literally. John is referring to the place where God's enemies will be destroyed. Finally, the seventh bowl is poured out into the air, which in the ancient Near East was understood as the space between heaven and earth, where spirits, powers, ideas, and influences lived. This unleashes earthquakes and hail, again recalling the plague of hail. Babylon is destroyed and the whole social and political system on earth collapses. Notice, earth itself is not destroyed. Did the people respond by repenting in the face of God's fury? No, they cursed God. At the end of chapter 16, Babylon is in ruins, but in chapter 17, we double back where Babylon isn't obliterated. Again, we're reminded Revelation isn't a chronological account of the end times. Chapter 17 is the middle of the chiastic structure we discussed earlier. This vision is a counterpart to the story of the woman and the dragon and describes the fall of Babylon, which John's readers understand is Rome. John's vision moves to the wilderness, where he will see the lies of the dragon, who is Satan, and the threats of the beast, Rome, for what they are. The description of the prostitute is satire. Think editorial cartoon, with Rome as the object of the satire. Roma was depicted as a noble woman, draped in battle dress, holding a sword, and reclining on the 7 hills of Rome, just like the U.S. is often portrayed as Uncle Sam. Instead of noble Roma, though, John describes an immoral courtesan, drunk on the blood of the saints, holding a cup of sewage, with Babylon the Great tattooed on her forehead like the lowest form of prostitute, riding on an outrageous beast. Instead of the 7 hills of Rome, there are 7 snarling heads on the beast, along with 10 horns. The 7-headed beast is like the 7-headed dragon, an earthly partner of Satan. The first beast mimicked Jesus. Now the whore of Babylon rides a beast that mimics God, who once was, now is not, and yet will come. These similarities heighten the sense of conflict between God and the beast, for they represent 2 different forms of power and 2 conflicting claims to the truth. We recognize the beast exists to destroy, but God exists to create, as we'll see in chapter 21. If you're confused at this point, take heart. John was too. The angel goes on to explain the significance of the whore of Babylon and the 7-headed beast. This is another time when we have to remember Revelation isn't a code we need to crack. When you use a code, each symbol has a single meaning. Think how maps use the same symbol for a school or for a church. John writes that we must understand the 7 heads in 2 ways, as 7 mountains and as 7 kings. It's just like the spirits of God were represented by lampstands earlier in Revelation. Now, there are many who want to speculate about what the 7 heads and 7 horns represent today. For instance, Hal Lindsey, the author of the late great Planet Earth, believed the 10 horns represented the 10 nations in the European common market. But now there are more than 10 nations in the EU. Tim LaHaye speculated that the UN Security Council would expand to 10 nations to rule the world. But here's the problem. Revelation wasn't written to issue predictions about the world situation 2,000 years in the future. That would make no sense to its original readers. That's just not how apocalyptic literature works. John, just like Paul, wrote to address the needs of his first century readers. When you try to identify the Roman emperors represented by the 7 heads of the beast, you can come up with a multitude of possibilities. Various scholars at different times have tried to make a scheme work. They're all interesting, but I think we should allow the imagery to speak. The number 7 is a number symbolizing completeness. So 7 kings point to the totality of the power of the beast. The 8th king to return plays off the Nero myth, that Nero returned after committing suicide. The 10 horns represent 10 lesser kings on the border of the Roman Empire, who we will soon meet. The bottom line, the end of the story is clear. The Lamb wins. The beast and the 10 horns turn on the whore and devour her. Rome is destroyed. Chapter 18 opens with the funeral for Babylon. The time frame keeps shifting, much like the time frame in A Christmas Carol, where Scrooge experiences the past, the present, and the future in just one night. An angel announces that Babylon has become smoldering ruins fit only for demons, not people. The reasons for Babylon's fall make the readers uncomfortable. Adultery is a metaphor for practices that violate relationships with God and the Lamb, as well as arrogance, oppression, and placing your security in wealth. The early Christians had tendencies in the same direction. The key verse is verse 4. The correct response to what has happened in the world is a changed life. A voice from heaven beckons the reader to abandon materialism and place their trust in God. This scene speaks to the readers who've been lulled into complacency by their prosperity, or those who think that compromising their faith is a reasonable price to pay to gain power, prestige, or position. Babylon brought God's judgments on herself, and she will have to drink the poison she mixed for others, herself. Because Babylon is self-centered, she glorifies herself, thinking she's sovereign. But she will be judged by God, not people, for vengeance is too dangerous to leave in the hands of humans. Suddenly, in an hour, it's all gone. 3 groups of mourners give eulogies over Babylon. How the reader reacts to these eulogies speaks to where their heart is. The kings of the earth stand at a safe distance so they don't suffer the same fate as Babylon. What they mourn is the loss of Babylon as the hub of the economic system and the collapse of their own trading partnerships and national wealth. The merchants, worried about their own self-interest, also grieve. When they lost Babylon, they lost their income. And notice what losses they grieve. All luxury items, not staples like food. And don't miss the last item in the list. Humans were for sale. The ancient Near East was built on slavery, and life without it was unthinkable. Think our own American history and using enslaved people as free labor. Even today, we exploit humans to secure luxury items. Civilizations and national empires too often promise luxury, but the luxury is for the few, at the expense of the exploitation of many. Babylon's demise brings an end to conspicuous consumption and materialism. The sea captains and sailors mourn the loss of the city because they've lost their business partner. All the mourners are filled with self-pity and weep for their bank accounts. There is rich symbolism here in verse 21. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus warns of a millstone hung around the neck of someone who causes another person to stumble. He also tells of having enough faith to throw a mountain into the sea. Now John sees Babylon thrown into the sea, never to hear their musicians, see their artists or merchants, or hold weddings again. In case you feel sorry for Babylon, we are reminded Babylon was built on violence. Business people grew rich on the heels of greed, oppression, murder, and military conquest. This critique stresses the interconnection between economic affluence, political brutality, and arrogance. Much of the language here echoes the prophet Ezekiel's threats against the nation of Tyre and Jeremiah's threats against Babylon during the exile. Since the description of the city of Babylon and her fall incorporates the Rome of John's time, along with the Old Testament prophecies against Tyre and Babylon, we understand this situation isn't confined in time and place. John's message is that Christians must resist trends and institutions that are driven by power, luxury, and prosperity, and is directed to those who are confronting assimilation and dealing with complacency. John now hears a great multitude praising God for delivering the world from the great whore of Babylon. This is permanent, symbolized by the smoke going up forever. As the whore is judged, the bride steps forward, and the marriage feast and bride images return. In the Old Testament, God is depicted as the husband and Israel as his bride. In Revelation, Jesus is the groom and the church is his bride. Again, these are relational images. The bride is faithful to her relationships while the whore is unfaithful. The whore tried to buy fine linen to satisfy her craving for a faithful relationship, but the bride's fine linen is a gift from God. What the whore was greedy to buy is something God gives in grace. John is so excited, he falls down to worship the angel. But the angel proclaims the message of the entire book of Revelation. Worship God. Revelation assumes the reader belongs to some community. The only question is which community? Is it the community symbolized by the bride, who worships God, or the community symbolized by the whore, who worships Satan? These last few chapters of Revelation are meant to persuade people to identify with the bride and worship God. Now, some important takeaways today. The repetitive nature of John's visions show Revelation isn't meant to predict future events, but are warnings issued in multiple ways. God may judge by allowing corrupt systems to collapse under their own weight. God may also judge by intervening directly when situations are spinning out of control. The last series of judgments ask whether you belong to the community of the whore of Babylon or to the bride of Christ. Thanks for joining us. I'd encourage you to download the discussion guide and resources that are online. Next time, we will look at the ending of Revelation, so please read Revelation chapters 19 to 22 to prepare. Until then, keep the faith.